Aurelia breathed in hush money and truffle steam. The dining room's lacquered walls caught chandeliers like nets of light, and every table murmured in the soft grammar of privilege, crystal chiming, silver whispering over porcelain, the low rustle of suits cut to announce their price without ever raising a voice. Chloe Vance moved through it like a current almost too quiet to see. The black dress was plain, the apron pressed, the hair pulled back in a practical knot. She balanced a tray with a steadiness that made water forget to ripple. Guests looked through her the way people look through tinted glass. That suited her just fine. People revealed their truest faces when they believed no one important was watching. And if Aurelia was a mirror for the city's top rung, Chloe had learned to read it. The way couples calcified into posed smiles when the check arrived. The way a junior banker's laugh died the instant his boss cleared his throat. The way old money tipped like habit and new money tipped like confession. She liked the work's math. 16 tables on her side, staggered reservations, a sommelier who measured time in vintages, a kitchen that fired with military tempo. She felt it in her bones, the choreography of hands and heat. She knew which seats ran cold from the air duct and slipped shawls to shoulders before anyone shivered, which regular needed a lemon wedge on the left, not the right, because he was left-handed and proud of it. Which plate must land dead center so a wife wouldn't correct a husband who corrected a waiter. The smallest mercies, precisely placed, could tilt a whole evening toward grace. Her wrist ached at the old scar near the vein, a pale crescent that caught the light when she reached for the bordelaise sauce. People sometimes noticed. They made up stories. Kitchen accident, teenage dare, a stubborn cat. She let them. The truth was a different animal, and animals are safest when they're unseen. The room's scent shifted. Wild mushrooms, butter, veal stock stitched with thyme. She set a copper pot on a garridon and stirred. The table was a study in curated ease, a diamond watch resting like a pet on a wrist, a phone face down in performative discipline, a laugh that asked permission before it left the mouth. Chloe flamed cognac, the blaze a brief cathedral of amber, then let the sauce fall like silk over medallions of beef. The man at the head of the table nodded, pleased with a world in which things appeared on cue. A server could live entirely on the surface of moments like this. She chose not to. Chloe had chosen not to, in so many ways that would never make sense to the room she served. 2 years earlier, the world had split cleanly in two before and after the accident. The Vance name filled front pages, then memorial programs, then a legal folder the weight of a brick. Cameras camped at the steel gates of the Vance estate and called it a gilded cage. She had always thought of it as a museum. Masterpieces under glass, temperature-controlled, admired, not touched. Vance Cybernetics, her parents' empire, was suddenly hers. The board spoke to her like she was glass, too. Fragile, valuable, in need of handlers. She listened and smiled and felt the cage's lock turning. She left. Not with a grand speech or a tabloid flourish. She slipped out of her own life the way she slipped between tables now, steady, invisible, efficient. She found a room that smelled of laundry and clean pine, paid in cash, kept her last name to herself. She learned the ethics of four-top rotation and the physics of walking fast without seeming to hurry. She learned that dignity had a different currency in places where no one pronounced Francois like a vowel. At the dish pit, steam kissed her face as plates rattled into stacks. "Corner," she said, and the runner pivoted, a ballet trained in narrow spaces. Chloe's knuckles brushed a hot pan, and the scar flashed. She didn't flinch. She had taught herself not to flinch. When you tell people you're fine, your body needs to know how to agree. In quiet pockets of the shift, her mind returned to the hum she had learned to ignore. A different kind of floor, a different tempo. Numbers, emergent patterns, the gentle tyranny of systems that shape human decisions before they know they've decided. Advanced cybernetics wasn't just robotics. It was predictive modeling, prosthetics that answered the brain's whisper. Ethics, frameworks her mother insisted were not optional. Build anything powerful enough, and it will eventually ask you who you are. She'd never decided how to answer. A couple complained about the table being too near the kitchen. She saw what they couldn't, that the proximity meant their plates would arrive hot enough to matter, and their server would catch their eye before they needed to raise a hand. She moved them anyway, because some people pay to be believed. On her way back, she refolded a napkin a busser had rushed. She had begun to think of dignity as a series of tiny alignments, each one invisible until the sum changed the shape of a night. Her section accelerated. A last-minute party of 6, a pescatarian added to a tasting menu not built for mercy, a bottle of Barolo requested because the table next door had one, and status is contagious. She floated across problems as if the floor sloped toward solutions. When the manager whispered about a VIP arriving unannounced, Chloe only nodded and shifted mental gears, the way you reduce heat without losing simmer. Between courses, the room's reflection sharpened. The tall glass doors threw back her outline. Black dress, black shoes, no jewelry. She studied the figure as if it were someone else's portrait and tried to see what the city saw. A woman who poured and cleared and smiled in careful portions. She thought of another reflection, one she had once hated, her face on the cover of an industry magazine, praised for potential she had not consented to exhibit. The caption had called her the future. Futures have obligations. Futures owe returns. Her apron buzzed. She closed the pantry door with her foot and stepped into the narrow quiet of the service hall, where the light flickered and the walls smelled faintly of lemons and steel. The phone's screen was a white square against her palm. One message. You can't hide forever, Chloe. Arthur Kensington didn't do drama. His sentences were usually dressed in three-piece calm, even over text, but the words carried a weight that made the hallway tilt. She felt the restaurant's pulse through the soles of her shoes, the kitchen's low thunder, the chandelier's faint electric hum, the city outside like an ocean waiting to be named. A call bubble appeared, then collapsed. Arthur knew better than to push. She tucked the phone back, reset her breath, and returned to the light. The dining room welcomed her with the same unbothered opulence, as if nothing in the world could shift its axis. At table 12, a woman lifted her glass for more water, and Chloe obliged, the stream unbroken, steady, purposeful. Somewhere in the distance, a siren grieved. Somewhere else, laughter rose and fell like money changing hands. She could live here, in the margins of other people's evenings, where she controlled small outcomes and postponed larger ones. The tray in her hand felt like balance itself. Her apron buzzed again, a second pulse against the ribs she had armored with ritual. You can't hide forever, Chloe. The word stuck, then settled, like the moment before a string is plucked and sound becomes inevitable. The dining room had that practiced shimmer of wealth, the kind that hummed without sound, where every table seemed arranged for spectacle, yet cloaked in discretion. Chloe steadied her tray and drifted toward the reservation, marked with a discreet gold star on the manager's chart. VIP, always a storm behind that word. At the corner table, the storm had already arrived. Ethan Sterling sat with shoulders angled just a little too tight for a man who commanded half the tech headlines that month. His reputation carried both charm and exhaustion, the kind that comes from negotiating empires while fending off wolves. Beside him lounged Brittany Davenport, her laugh sharp as crystal breaking. She wore wealth like armor, every bracelet a chain she pretended was freedom, every sneer a declaration that the world owed her attention. Chloe approached with the stillness of ritual. "Good evening," she said, setting down the menus, the cadence even, professional. Ethan nodded, a flicker of recognition in his eyes that passed too quickly. Brittany didn't nod at all. "Finally," Brittany sighed, as if Chloe had kept her waiting in a desert. "I thought this place was supposed to be efficient." Her words dripped onto the table like spilled wine. Chloe only folded her hands at her apron, the scar catching the chandelier's light for a moment, before vanishing again. Ethan cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably, but said nothing. Chloe noted it the way she noted undercooked veal, catalogued, not addressed. The orders came in barbed fragments. Brittany demanded substitutions, then rolled her eyes when Chloe answered with calm knowledge of the chef's limitations. She mocked the way Chloe poured water, the way she held the tray, the very idea of someone working on her feet all night, as though it were beneath notice. Each jab landed not because it hurt Chloe's pride, but because it spoke against everything she had chosen to value: dignity in work, grace in service, honor in the smallest acts. Around them, other guests sensed the ripple. A businessman stole glances between his oysters. A young couple leaned closer, pretending not to listen. Aurelia thrived on whispers, and tonight Brittany's laughter provided the currency. Chloe moved like tidewater, refusing to break against the rocks. She set down the appetizers: tuna crudo, truffle risotto, beet salad with goat cheese, each plate aligned with precision, a geometry of care. Ethan murmured thanks, soft, guilty, almost drowned beneath Brittany's careless chatter. Then Brittany lifted her glass. Ruby wine shimmered like a warning. She turned, eyes locking directly onto Chloe, with a smile that sliced. "Tell me," Brittany asked, voice loud enough to catch neighboring tables, "do you ever wish you were someone else?" The stemware paused mid-air. The dining room exhaled. Chloe felt the words coil around her like vines tugging at a hidden root. She straightened, tray steady, eyes calm. But inside, something shifted, an old fault line beginning to tremble, the reminder that invisibility was never permanent. The chandelier hummed overhead, waiting for the answer. The pause stretched long enough for the chandeliers to buzz in her ears. Chloe felt the sting of Brittany's question coil tighter, like a hand pressing against her throat. Yet her tray remained steady, her posture unbroken. She had learned long ago that dignity was most powerful when it looked effortless. Brittany leaned back in her chair, clearly unsatisfied with the calm she faced. Her manicured fingers tapped the rim of the wineglass as if keeping score. "Oh, come now," she said, voice pitched to Carrie. "Don't tell me you've never imagined trading in that apron for something shinier." The laugh that followed was brittle, designed for an audience rather than amusement. Chloe lowered the empty carafe to her side, ready to retreat. But Brittany's eyes caught on the faint pale curve along Chloe's wrist. A cruel glint surfaced. "What's that?" Brittany asked, pointing with a flourish that made Ethan shift uncomfortably. Come closer. Let me see it. The table went silent, forks suspended mid-air. Chloe hesitated, then set the tray down with deliberate grace. She extended her hand just enough for the scar to catch the light. Brittany's smile sharpened. "Oh my God," she gasped theatrically. "How unappetizing. Do they let you serve fine cuisine with marks like that?" The words landed harder than the sting of memory. Chloe felt her ribs tighten, her pulse hammering, yet her face revealed nothing. She had endured worse than casual cruelty. Still, it wasn't Brittany's insult that struck deepest. It was Ethan's silence. He sat frozen, eyes lowered to the tablecloth as though it had suddenly become fascinating. His jaw tensed, but no defense came. No word, no gesture, not even the hollow courtesy of redirecting the conversation. He let Brittany's mockery hang in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Chloe withdrew her hand quietly, reclaiming her space with precision. She lifted the tray again, each movement practiced, measured. The scar disappeared into shadow, but the ache remained. Not in her wrist, but deeper, in the hollow where trust once lived. The other diners resumed their murmurs, pretending not to notice, though glances flickered across the room. Chloe walked away from the table with the same steady rhythm, though each step felt heavier. At the service station, steam from a copper pot clouded her vision. She focused on the mechanics, refilling carafes, folding napkins, aligning silverware, rituals of control. Inside, however, her thoughts sharpened into a single truth. Silence can be sharper than cruelty. And Ethan Sterling, executor of her parents' estate, had just cut her without lifting a hand. She carried the next course toward their table, eyes steady, mask unbroken. But beneath that calm exterior, something had begun to fracture. The memory of Arthur's warning text pressed at her ribs like a second heartbeat. She couldn't hide forever. And perhaps tonight was proof that the world would not let her. The moment felt like the slow drawing of a blade, the hush before the strike. Something was coming. Chloe could sense it as clearly as she sensed the weight of the plates in her hands. The humiliation was not over. It was only the first cut. The dining room swelled with the polished rhythm of courses and conversation. Yet Chloe could sense Brittany winding herself like a coiled spring. Some people feasted on food, others on power. Tonight, Brittany wanted a second helping of the latter. Chloe approached with a bottle of Bordeaux cradled in one arm, her steps measured, tray balanced. The crimson liquid caught the chandelier's glow as she tilted it toward the glassware. For a moment, the act was ceremonial. Liquid history poured with reverence. Guests at nearby tables paused, half watching, aware that wine service at Aurelia was performance as much as hospitality. Brittany's heel shifted under the table. At first it looked like a careless adjustment, but then came the sharp thud against the pedestal. The jolt shot through the crystal, and the wine slipped from its arc, splattering across Brittany's couture dress in a dark, blooming stain. The gasp was theatrical, a sharp intake rehearsed to perfection. Brittany shoved her chair back, her voice slicing through the room. "Are you serious? Look at this! This dress is worth more than her month's paycheck!" Forks froze mid-air, conversations snapped shut. The restaurant held its breath. Chloe's instinct was to apologize, to smooth over, but something in her gut whispered otherwise. She hadn't lost control of the bottle. She had felt the kick, deliberate and timed. Still, her training guided her tone. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. Let me fetch—" "No!" Brittany cut in, rising to her feet. Her voice carried, deliberately pitched to claim every ear in the room, so. "Girls like you need to be taught your place. You think because you can balance a tray, you deserve respect? You don't." The words reverberated, bouncing off crystal and marble. A ripple of unease spread through the diners. A hostess hovered near the door, unsure whether to intervene. Ethan Sterling shifted, guilt flickering across his features. He opened his mouth, then shut it, paralyzed between loyalty and discomfort. His hesitation lit the scene brighter than any spotlight. Chloe stood rooted, the bottle still balanced in her hand, a soldier at attention. She could feel every eye in the room pressing against her skin. Heat rose up her neck, but her spine refused to bend. The stain on Brittany's dress grew darker, wider, as if feeding the drama. "This is unacceptable," Brittany declared, grabbing a linen napkin and dabbing theatrically. "If management here has any sense, she'll be fired tonight." The silence that followed was suffocating. It pressed down from the chandeliers. It hung heavy from the velvet drapes. It made the clinking of a single spoon in the far corner sound like thunder. Ethan's gaze swept across the room, then landed on Chloe. His jaw tightened. The weight of judgment hovered between them, whether he would side with cruelty or break the silence that had already cut her once. The entire restaurant waited, suspended, the humiliation hanging like a blade ready to drop. The manager rushed in with a strained smile, trying to mend the spectacle with polished words. Ethan rose before Chloe could speak, his hand already moving toward his wallet. The gesture was smooth, reflexive, but it stung sharper than any insult. "I'll cover the damages," he said quickly, sliding his card across the table as though he could purchase silence. His voice dripped with something worse than anger. Pity. It was the sound of someone smoothing over an inconvenience rather than seeking justice. Brittany basked in the moment, tossing her stained napkin onto the table with a flourish. "As you should," she snapped. "At least someone here understands standards." The manager's eyes flicked toward Chloe, full of apology but empty of action. She nodded once, set the wine bottle back on the tray, and excused herself with the kind of grace that felt like a cage. Her chest burned, not with humiliation alone, but with the weight of Ethan's silence. Twice now, he had stood by while cruelty flourished. She pushed through the service doors, past the polished brass and velvet curtains, into the kitchen's roar. Steam clouded her vision, pots clanged, orders barked. Yet the noise couldn't drown the humiliation thrumming in her ears. By the time she reached the alley behind Aurelia, the night air struck her lungs like ice. The alley was slick with rain, the dumpsters breathing their sour perfume, the hum of the city's nightlife echoing in the distance. Chloe leaned against the brick wall, pressing her palms flat to its cool surface as though she could ground herself there. Her phone buzzed again. For a moment she considered letting it ring out, but Arthur Kensington's name on the screen forced her hand. She answered, her voice steadier than she felt. "I told you," Arthur said without greeting, his tone low and urgent. "You can't hide forever." Chloe let the silence linger, the sting of the evening still raw. "Arthur, not tonight." "I'm afraid tonight is exactly the time," he pressed. "Sterling Innovations is circling the drain. The vultures are moving in. If you don't step in now, your parents' legacy will vanish before your eyes." The words cut through the damp air, colder than the rain beginning to fall. Chloe closed her eyes, the alley spinning. She thought of her mother's voice, "Minta." of the countless nights at the family estate where legacy was spoken of not as a burden, but as a compass. She had walked away from all of it to live invisible, to learn dignity from the ground up. And yet the ground seemed to be shaking beneath her feet. "Arthur," she whispered, gripping the phone tighter. "I left that world for a reason." "And if you don't return," he said, voice grave, "there won't be a world left to return to." A car horn blared at the far end of the street. The restaurant's laughter floated faintly behind her, muffled but mocking. Chloe's scar itched as if remembering. She drew in a breath, rain streaking across her apron. For the first time since she'd disappeared into this life, the choice wasn't about hiding. It was about whether she was ready to fight. Arthur's final words came like a sentence pronounced. "It's now or never, Chloe." The line went dead, leaving her alone in the rain, the city pressing in, the weight of legacy pounding in her chest. Morning light spilled like glass shards through the windows of Sterling Innovation's boardroom. The city glittered beyond the skyline, indifferent to the storm brewing inside. The long mahogany table was crowded with restless men in suits, their voices sharp with tension. Folders lay open, numbers bleeding red, projections tilting downward. At the head sat Ethan Sterling. His tie was knotted perfectly, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. He drummed his pen against a stack of contracts, considering the only option left on the table: a sale to EV Capital. The fund was a ghost in the financial world. Ruthless, efficient, faceless. The room buzzed with unease as Ethan hesitated, pen hovering above the signature line. Brittany was there too, perched beside him like a queen observing peasants. She sipped her sparkling water with studied elegance, her smile sharp as a blade. "Darling," she purred, loud enough for the directors to hear, "sometimes letting go is the smartest move. No shame in cashing out gracefully." Her words dripped with the kind of false sympathy that sought only to be overheard. The room shifted when the doors opened. Every head turned. Chloe Vance stepped inside. Gone was the plain black dress of Aurelia. In its place, a tailored suit of deep charcoal, sharp lines cutting her silhouette into something undeniable. Her hair, once knotted back in service, framed her face with a calm authority. The shift was not costume, it was revelation. She walked with the poise of someone who had carried trays through hostile sexual dining rooms and secrets through heavier halls. "Excuse me," Chloe said, her voice carrying like steel wrapped in velvet. She moved to the head of the table, each step measured, deliberate. Brittany's laugh cracked through the tension. "Did the waitress get lost on her way to the staff entrance?" The words were coated in sugar, designed to draw blood. Chloe didn't flinch. Her gaze swept across the board, pausing on Ethan. For a heartbeat, recognition flickered in his eyes. Confusion, disbelief, a dawning memory of silence in a restaurant gilded with truffles and cruelty. Arthur Kensington entered behind her, his calm presence anchoring the storm. He placed a folder on the table, his voice even but commanding. "Gentlemen, allow me to clarify. Meet Chloe Vance, head of EV Capital." The words detonated. Ethan's pen slipped from his hand, clattering against the wood. The directors exchanged glances, whispers rising like wind through dry leaves. Brittany's practiced smile faltered, confusion flashing across her face before she caught herself. But it was too late. The mask had cracked. Chloe lowered herself into a seat opposite Ethan, folding her hands with composure. She looked every inch the heir she had once chosen to hide. and something more. The woman who had lived both sides of the glass. Ethan stared at her, the boardroom spinning. The waitress, the heiress, the enemy or the savior. The balance of power had shifted, and every man in the room knew it. The boardroom held its breath. Chloe let the silence stretch, her presence filling every corner until the men who once dismissed her began to fidget in their seats. She opened the folder Arthur had placed before her and slid a series of documents across the polished mahogany. EV Capital's offer isn't what it seems, she began, her voice calm but edged with precision. On the surface, it looks like a bailout. In reality, it's a hostile dismantling. Within 18 months, Sterling Innovations would be gutted, patents sold, employees scattered. Her words landed like stones into water, sending ripples across the table. One director coughed nervously. Another adjusted his tie. Ethan leaned forward, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Chloe didn't give them time to recover. She pulled out a logbook copy, its pages annotated in her meticulous hand. You all missed the pattern because you trusted the wrong man. I traced unusual meeting times, entries in the visitor log that didn't match Ethan's schedule. Those signatures belong to Richard Davies. He's been funneling insider information to EV Capital for months. All eyes swung to Richard. His face, once smug with confidence, drained of color. That's absurd, he sputtered. She's lying. She's a waitress, for God's sake. Arthur's voice cut in, calm and lethal. She's the rightful heir of Vance Cybernetics, and unlike you, she respects legacies. Chloe slid another sheet across the table. Emails, coded transactions, the kind of trail only someone with both access and patience could uncover. The evidence glowed under the sterile boardroom lights. The directors shifted, the air thick with betrayal. Richard slammed his palms onto the table. This is outrageous! His chair screeched as he pushed back, but security was already at the door. Arthur gave a nod. The guards stepped forward. As Richard was escorted out, his voice echoed down the hall, bitter and broken. You'll regret this, all of you. The heavy doors shut, sealing the outburst outside. Inside, the silence returned, but this time it belonged to Chloe. Ethan stared at her, his jaw tight, his pen forgotten on the table. Who are you really? He asked, his voice low, caught between awe and accusation. Chloe met his gaze without blinking. I am the woman who refuses to let my parents' legacy be devoured by men who mistake greed for vision. For a long moment, no one moved. The board members sat straighter, as if realigning themselves with the gravity in the room. Chloe had turned the tide, not with bluster, but with clarity. The game had shifted, and now she held the board. The boardroom emptied slowly, men in tailored suits murmuring to each other, their glances darting back at Chloe as if she were a storm they had underestimated. The last echo of Richard's protests had vanished, leaving only the hum of the city through the glass walls. Brittany stood awkwardly near Ethan, her earlier bravado shriveling beneath the weight of silence. She clutched her designer bag like it might shield her from consequence. Ethan, she whispered, forcing a brittle smile, surely you won't let her disrupt everything we've built. He cut her off with a glance colder than glass. For the first time, Ethan's posture shifted, not hunched with fatigue, not frozen in hesitation, but upright, decisive. His eyes swept over Brittany, seeing through her theatrics, her cruelty, the pettiness she had flaunted at Aurelia. The truth was so sharp it didn't need words. Brittany tried again, her voice wobbling. It was just a joke. You know I was only... Enough! Ethan's voice cracked like a verdict. He turned away, dismissing her without ceremony. Brittany faltered, lips parting in shock, then spun on her heels. Her stilettos clicked furiously against the marble as she stormed out, leaving the scent of expensive perfume hanging bitter in the air. The door closed. Silence pressed in. Ethan turned toward Chloe, guilt heavy in his eyes. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words rough, dragged from somewhere deep. "Not for this, for Aurelia. I should have spoken. I should have stopped her. I didn't. And that silence, it's haunted me since." Chloe studied him, her face calm, though the memory burned behind her ribs. She had replayed that dinner 100 times. The scar exposed, Brittany's mockery, Ethan's silence slicing deeper than cruelty. "Apologies," she said quietly, "don't heal legacies. Actions do." Her words carried no malice, only truth. They struck him harder than anger ever could. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight. His hands curled into fists against the table, as if anchoring himself to resolve. "Then I'll prove it. No more silence." Chloe gathered her folder, her movements steady. She had come to shield her parents' legacy, not to mend Ethan Sterling's conscience. Rising from her seat, she paused at the door, turning back just long enough for her words to land. "Do better, Ethan. For your company. For your people. Not for me." She left him there, alone in the vast boardroom, the city's skyline stretching like judgment behind the glass. Ethan remained at the table, her words echoing in the hollow she'd left behind. And for the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders was not just profit and loss, it was conscience. Weeks unfolded like chapters rewritten. Sterling innovations began to shift, not in headlines first, but in whispers, the kind that travel faster than press releases. Ethan Sterling was different. He showed up in labs without entourage, asked engineers to explain their work in plain words, and listened without interrupting. In meetings, he stopped speaking first, letting the quiet draw out until voices that had long been ignored finally entered the room. He began to treat credit as currency to be shared, not hoarded. Junior staff found their names on reports. Receptionists noticed his greetings weren't cursory anymore. Even the cafeteria workers felt it when he asked for suggestions about the lunch line flow. Small things, but dignity always begins in the margins. Yet Aurelia was the test he couldn't avoid. The night he returned, the dining room shimmered as ever, chandeliers bending light into silence. The manager's eyes widened when Ethan walked in alone. No Brittany at his side, no board members in tow. He requested Chloe's old section. She wasn't there. Her path had already shifted, but the staff who remembered her carried fragments of her grace. Ethan ordered a simple meal, no substitutions, no performance. When the bill came, he placed a generous tip without calculation, then asked to see the manager. "I owe you," he said softly. "Not money. Respect. I failed one of your own here, and I won't make that mistake again." The manager nodded, eyes glinting with understanding that went deeper than policy. Later that week, Ethan stood once more before Chloe. They met in a quieter room this time, away from chandeliers and boardroom glass. He carried no entourage, only sincerity. "You were right," he said. "Legacies aren't healed by words. I've started changing the way I lead, but I need to know, does it matter?" Chloe regarded him with the steady calm she had honed in the invisible world of service. Waiters see more than you think. So do receptionists, janitors, assistants. They see the soul of a company clearer than its board ever will. Ethan nodded, her words searing deeper than any consultant's report. He looked at her not as an heiress or an adversary, but as a mirror held up to his own choices. He drew a breath, then asked, almost hesitant, "And where does that leave you, Chloe? Hidden or leading?" The question hung in the air, heavier than a contract, more intimate than an apology. Chloe didn't answer, not yet. Some truths demand action before voice, but in her silence, Ethan sensed the turning of a tide. 6 months later, Sterling Innovations no longer looked like the same company teetering on the edge of collapse. The headlines called it a renaissance, analysts praised a cultural shift, and employees whispered that the walls themselves seemed lighter. The vultures had circled and flown elsewhere. Ethan had invited Chloe back, not to observe, not to consult from a distance, but to stand beside him. The boardroom buzzed as directors prepared to open another quarterly meeting. This time, though, the energy was different, anticipation rather than dread. Chloe entered with quiet composure, the tailored suit a mirror of the authority she now claimed without question. She carried a folder embossed with her parents' initials, its weight both burden and inheritance. Ethan stood at her side, not in command over her, but as a partner. He addressed the board first, his voice steady. "This company has survived because we chose to listen, to value every voice. That was not my lesson alone. It was hers." He turned toward Chloe. "It's time she speaks for herself." Chloe placed the folder on the table, her hand resting against its cool leather. She looked around the room, faces that once measured her only by rumor, eyes that once dismissed the woman in an apron. Now they waited. "My place," Chloe said, her tone even but alive with conviction, "is here. Not hidden in shadows, not pretending to be someone else, and certainly not walking away from what my parents built. I chose to learn the world from the ground up, because you cannot lead what you do not understand. Now I choose to lead." Ethan allowed a faint smile, the kind forged from humility rather than pride. But Chloe wasn't finished. "Legacies aren't relics. They are alive and they demand responsibility. We will build a company that doesn't just innovate technology, but respects the hands that keep it alive. From the boardroom to the mailroom, every voice matters." There was no applause. Instead, there was something rarer, silence of agreement, the deep hum of truth acknowledged. At the far end of the table, the manager from Aurelia sat quietly, invited as Chloe's guest observer. His presence was symbolic, almost defiant, a reminder that no voice, no role, was beneath notice. He met Chloe's eyes and nodded, a silent testament to the dignity she had always defended. The meeting began, but Chloe allowed herself one private pause. She opened the folder, the initials of her parents gleaming faintly under the lights. Her fingers brushed them gently before she closed it again. "This isn't just survival," she murmured, voice steady enough for the room to hear. "It's a new legacy." And for the first time, the boardroom did not feel like a cage, but a place reborn.